The Philippines is on the verge of starvation. The 2022 presidential elections in the Philippines brought new hope for Filipino farmers. After Rodrigo Duterte's unsuccessful agricultural policies, farmers were expecting a miracle. Instead, they got a new import bill and some hard-hitting financial storms. As it stands today, farmers in the Philippines are being pushed into poverty and hunger. Why isn't the government investing in feeding its growing population? Join us as we break down Marcos Jr.'s unpopular import policies, the recent tussle with China, and the looming threat of hunger in the Philippines. The current agricultural crisis in the Philippines is perhaps Marcos Jr.'s biggest policy failure. When President Bongbong Marcos Jr. took office in June 2022, he declared himself as the Secretary of Agriculture too. His interest in the agriculture sector is also a twisted form of tribute to his father, who had lost his presidential tenure 36 years ago. For Marcos Jr., an efficient agriculture sector isn't just about politics. It is about restoring glory to his family name as well. However, despite his driving passion, Marcos Jr. is failing. Farmers in the Philippines were already struggling to boost production during tough times. The war in Ukraine and the COVID-19 turmoil had left them economically paralyzed and poor. In fact, farmers and fisherfolk are the two groups of people who consistently live below the poverty line in the Philippines. When Marcos Jr. took the role of Secretary of Agriculture, it was his way of acknowledging the country's agrarian origins. Farmers in the country had expected better and more, but instead of solving systemic issues in agriculture, Marcos Jr. chose to betray them. Farmers have accused Marcos Jr. of reviving the failed agriculture policies of his late father, the same policies that had left them disempowered and poor. During Marcos Sr.'s dictatorship, the Philippines had fallen into a big import trap. And by the looks of it, Bongbong is following his father's footsteps too. Importing food products leaves the Philippines with inflation, poor farmers, and high fuel prices. While these observations seem preliminary, historical data suggests otherwise. Economists note that the Philippines' reliance on food imports makes it sensitive to global price swings. And as the government foots a hefty bill, staples in the country become more and more inaccessible. Current numbers suggest these problems too. At the core of this crisis, the biggest issue is the growing population in the country. At the same time, the government refuses to modernize or advance its farming sector. To put it in simple words, the Philippines doesn't have enough food to feed its people. In this scenario, Marcos Jr.'s move is to import food staples, such as rice and fertilizer, that the farming sector needs. In 2023, Marcos Jr. doubled the National Rice Program budget to 30.3 billion pesos. And nope, that budget allocation wasn't to subsidize the farmers. It was to increase the volume of rice imports. Now, the most natural question to ask is pretty simple. How come the government can't afford to put money into agriculture? Well, we can give you a plethora of answers. But the biggest impetus is the government's capacity to overinvest in big infrastructure projects that never see the light of the day. If you've been to the Philippines, you already know that the country suffers through an infrastructure deficit. Beyond Manila, the country is almost in a slump. But how do the country's failed infrastructure projects cause issues for the farmers? The trade-off is pretty simple. Every government has a limited budget to spend on infrastructure projects. For the Philippines, the priority has been urban projects. Such plans constitute railways, bridges, power facilities, water storage facilities, and so on. In fact, the country's capital suffers immensely. The biggest problems are broken bridges, power failures, telecommunication issues, and water shortages. When Marcos Jr. assumed office in 2022, he had found himself with two key challenges. The first one was the looming hunger in the Philippines, and the second was the failure of build, build, build. Enjoying the video so far? Give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more detailed analytical videos like these. Now, to give you some context, Build, Build, Build was the golden policy of Rodrigo Duterte, the former president of the Philippines. He had called the country's infrastructure woes the Achilles heel of the economy, and with the support of the Asian Development Bank, he had promised to give his country a golden age of infrastructure. But of course, his policies didn't focus on building capacity in the agriculture sector. His focus was mostly urban and modern. Duterte's heart was indeed in the right place. He had rightfully recognized issues like traffic jams and undrinkable water, but he neglected his farmers exponentially. So let's put things in perspective, shall we? Build, Build, Build was successful in delivering some projects and creating jobs, but most of its ambitious projects were either underfunded or got trapped in the debt cycle. Duterte wasn't exactly flush with funds to pour into mega projects in Manila. The debt-fueled experiences exposed the country's rampant corruption problem too. Many mega projects lost money to the political elites of the country. Sure, Rodrigo had promised to dismantle these corrupt structures, but he didn't have enough success. Despite his many failures, Duterte had hoped that Marcos Jr. would continue to put money in Build, Build, Build. Well, that plan went down the drain pretty quickly. At the end of the day, the Philippines was left with hefty expenses that didn't yield much. Duterte ignored problems like food insecurity to fund infrastructure. He had hoped that the wave of modernization would inspire the farmers too. The only problem, his mega infrastructure plans didn't include investing in the country's most useful industry. In fact, the lack of funding for farmers jolted the total factor productivity growth rate of the sector. This particular metric measures the efficiency of the agriculture sector, and in 2021, the Philippines' productivity growth rate was just 1.7%. To make matters worse, Marcos Jr. has an entirely new plan to boost the country's infrastructure. While Duterte had managed a pro-China policy to develop the Philippines, the new president swung towards the US. In a recent turn of events, the Marcos administration has pulled out of China's Belt and Road Initiative. While these decisions are political, we can already see the Filipino farmers suffering. Marcos Jr. is investing in increasing food imports, and his new anti-China policy dictates that he's going to rely on local funding to complete mega railway and dam projects. Previously, the Philippines was expected to fund these colossal projects with Chinese loans. That particular option doesn't exist anymore. As the Philippines continues to contest with Beijing in the South China Sea, its military budget is going to see a stretch too. In the middle of these geopolitical tensions, the Philippines has sidelined its biggest enemy so far, the turbulent climate change. Recently, the country's food production saw a major decline because of the El Niño weather system. And in the recent past, the agriculture sector has lost billions of dollars to natural disasters like Typhoon Rai. Both Duterte and Marcos Jr. didn't lay out solid plans to adapt their agriculture sector to the changing climate. The lack of capital for farmers suggests that the country is on the brink of perpetual hunger as well. This is not to say that the country can't produce food. However, the constant tussle with climate-related issues has created unique problems like affordability. Due to the El Niño wave, the government had cut off irrigation supply for the drier parts of the country. The direct impact of this problem was a jolt in food inflation in the country. Indeed, the Philippines is gradually controlling its hyperinflation problem, but the food prices remain unaffordable. In 2023 alone, food inflation was recorded at 6.7%. Marcos Jr.'s recent increase in import bills isn't going to fix that problem either. Of course, the quickest fix for this problem is funding projects for climate change mitigation. Yet, the government seems to be more interested in starting and abandoning ambitious projects. The Philippine National Railway's South Long Haul project is one of those expensive plans. We can't argue that the country has major infrastructure woes, but can the Philippines afford to undercut its farmers to invest in hefty projects? That would be a hard no. The biggest challenge for the Marco administration is clear. He has to find the right balance between subsidizing farmers and funding mega-projects. His anti-China policies have left the Philippines with a new budgetary crisis. Plus, his long tenure will bring new climate-related problems. Marco's most important test will be to build a resilient agrarian economy, and his pilot response is going to be a do-or-die situation for the Filipino farmers. Did you find the video interesting? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and share it with your friends. Click right here to watch more content from us.